Welcome to the Massif Impact Show. I'm your host, Taylor. Today I've got with me a very special guest, usually my co-host, Nathan Fort. Nathan, how's it going?
Good. Hey, I'm excited about this because this is going to be all about me, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're digging into my story, and I'm usually a co-host asking the questions, but this is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a little different. We're going to talk about business, going to talk about overcoming adversity, talk about wealth, maybe a little investing. It's going to be good. So let's talk about where you are today. You're running a wealth management practice, retirement. Tell me about that.
I'd say the biggest thing I do is I help people understand financial concepts, and we strategize and we plan. One thing that's kept me from getting bored the 18 years I've been doing this is every individual, every household is unique. Everybody's situation is different. The resources are different. Timeline, family dynamics, everything's unique. So it's almost like I've got a new riddle to solve. But essentially what I do is I get to know a family, get to know their goals, their challenges, their resources, and we work together to build out a plan. But I'd say 80% of what I do really is help people understand financial concepts so that they get the logic behind what we're doing.
Right. What's the, if you had to kind of boil it down to the biggest mistake that you see or the biggest misconception that people come into your practice with, what would you say that is?
The biggest is not having a plan, not having a strategy. Right. I see a lot of resources, but no real strategy. It's almost like if you're building a house and you just have a lot just stacked with a bunch of different materials, and we don't know what we're building.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's good that you have the materials because we can build something out of it, but there's going to be a lot of inefficiencies if you don't have a plan to start with. You're probably going to overbuy some stuff. You're not going to order as much as another, and you might get the wrong stuff. So a lot of what we do is taking whatever resources that family has accumulated and kind of assigning a purpose to it. So everything aligns with an overall objective, like building a house.
Right. Absolutely. So get them in there, figure out their objectives, figure out how to make it all align. Once you do that, what's the reaction from the people that you work with? Like, what's the overall feeling that they get walking away from that? And how is it different from when they first walk in your door?
Oh, the first word that comes to my mind is relief.
Yeah.
When things are not clear from a financial planning standpoint, you just feel that they're not. You just don't have that level of confidence that you really need. So what I like to see is just that feeling of relief. There's confidence, I'll say the word again, where they just feel a whole lot more comfortable with where they're at. And to me, that is probably the most rewarding thing about what I do, because a lot of that kind of falls back to, and you'll probably get here in a second, but my upbringing and some of the struggles we went through in my earlier years. Yeah. I think that makes these moments a little more sweet for me.
And did you know that you wanted to get into financial services, or how did you get into that path?
I didn't. I learned from my upbringing that I needed to figure out a way to get money and understand money. We had a lot of really tough circumstances, really hard, very difficult things we went through, and I just understood that whatever it is I do, I've got to figure this whole money thing out. And I didn't know how to do that. You can get all the way through high school and college without one financial planning course.
Right.
So you're not necessarily going to leave school knowing what to do with money and taxes and investing. You're kind of left to yourself.
Yeah.
And experts. And fortunately, there's a lot of experts out there. There's great books and courses, and that's eventually what I started doing. But
so you got into reading about it, studying for almost a selfish reason, right? Like to protect yourself, and then that led into a career. How did you actually get into wanting to get licensed and get into the industry?
So that was my father-in-law, my wife's dad. He was a financial planner, and I had all this built up motivation to understand money, and like I said, I didn't know how I was going to do it.
Right.
Then I met my wife and met her dad, and that's when the light bulb went on. I'm like, oh, holy cow, this is one way that I could do this.
Yeah.
And so I got into the financial services business, mostly like selling financial products, but that's all I knew how to do. But that set a good, it kind of laid the groundwork for kind of the beginning of my financial education.
And what were you with a big firm at that point, or
I wouldn't say it was a
start
big
out?
one. It was kind of a smaller agency. There were
Okay.
maybe 20, 30 of us, and for the most part, everybody was kind of independent, so I wasn't really a W-2 employee.
Right.
But man, this is a true story. I went from washing windows on like a Monday to offering financial products like on a Wednesday. And when I understood the numbers, of course, sitting down, being, clean in an air-conditioned room, talking about money
Right.
was a whole lot more attractive
A little
than
bit of a
hanging
step
off
up.
that top rung on the ladder. I'm sweating, and
That's
it was
that's quite the
hard work.
shift. That's quite the shift in your
Oh,
day-to-day
huge.
activity. So at what point did you make the jump to being a business owner, being independent, and being entrepreneurial?
The longer I was in the business, the more aware I became of what else was out there. Because I'm always, and that's just something about me. I'm always asking, what's the next step? What's the next level?
Right.
And I'm always looking ahead, and so I've kind of learned, where the very top is, and that's essentially where we are here with Massif. I mean, this is kind of the pinnacle of wealth management. So it took some time to get there, and there's so much I've learned in 18 years, and I've seen so many things change, from markets to tax law to inflation and just the culture behind retirement planning and wealth management. It's a very fluid, liquid industry, which is kind of what's interesting about it.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say have been the biggest changes that you've seen recently that people need to be aware of? What's shifting in the industry?
I think some walls are breaking down. I think there's been this arena where the ultra high net worth institutional investors have kind of stayed in, that is slowly becoming more and more accessible and available to people who aren't the elite of the elite. If you just look at Investopedia, for example, they say a very high net worth person would be someone who has over 5 million in investable assets. An ultra high net worth person is someone who has over 30 million in assets. But when you look at the history, the arena, this ultra high net worth arena with all these institutional private equity type investments, has been for a long time exclusive to the probably top 1% of the ultra high net worth.
Right.
So
the billion plus families.
Yeah, because of technology and the access of information, we have this universe of technology which makes it so easy to access information, and we have the ability to put together platforms to kind of streamline things that have been so complicated and difficult to get into. So barriers are getting broken down.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's been interesting to watch. For me, it was more as a client looking at the wealth management system and seeing where it was, years ago when we were first kind of looking into wealth management and seeing who would manage our stuff for us, and to today, the options that we've created at our company it's an immense change, right? It's a massive change where now you have so much more access to the stuff that only the big dogs could get into before. It's really exciting, and I love talking about this stuff, obviously. Let's go back to your roots. Let's talk about how you were raised and how you really got here, right? Because so much of who we are is kind of ingrained in us from a young age. So who was Nathan Fort growing up? How did you start out?
Well, I'm one of 8 kids. I'm a twin. My dad was very good at what he did. He was an electrical engineer. He worked on some pretty high profile projects. He was on the team that designed the B-2 bomber for Northrop.
That's cool.
Was super brilliant guy. I learned very early in high school to not bring my math homework to my dad because he'd wrap my brain in a knot. And he always got the answers right would sometimes prove the textbook wrong, but it'd take us like 3 hours to do it. But anyway, he was laid off quite a bit. So when my dad finished a project, or if the project lost its funding, he was out of work. So we, were on welfare for quite a while. We lost the house, kind of got back up on our feet with some help, and we lost a second house. And at that point, we were technically homeless. We had to move in with my grandparents. And I remember, just the emotional and physical toll this took, particularly on my mom. My dad was pretty good at kind of hiding his feelings. He was stone cold. Nothing really bothered him. But my mom, you could see the impact.
And how old were you at this time?
Oh, I was, it was probably between age 8 and 14.
Okay.
So pretty formative years,
definitely.
And you'd probably agree that some of your earliest experiences with money kind of still shape the way you think about money today.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of fear associated with money, particularly financial problems. So that was really where I got a lot of my motivation to kind of understand money. I was terrified of the idea of someday having my own family and not knowing how all this stuff worked. So, and I also learned from that whole experience how unreliable a job can be. For decades and decades, it's been preached that you go to school, you get your education, you're going to get a secure job. And I never saw a secure job on display. When I was a kid, we were always terrified of my dad losing his job. So I actually learned from that to not get a job, don't get a job. And I did all kinds of stuff. I was washing windows, like I said, power washing. I remember working for a buddy of mine who was doing Christmas lights. He was putting Christmas lights up on houses, which is pretty good money.
It's actually not a bad business.
So if you're in high school, college, and you want a good idea for making some good money, there's some good money there. But I was helping people take down Christmas lights. It was probably January, February. And one guy had asked me, he said, "Hey, while you're up there, can you clean out my rain gutters?" And I was like, "Well, sure." And he's like, "Well, how much do you charge to do that?" I'd never done it, so I tossed out $300, I think. So he's like, "All right." So 30 minutes later...
Should have asked for more.
So I cleaned out his rain gutters, and 30 minutes later, I got a check for $300. So the light bulb went on. That next day, I came to the neighborhood. I knocked the entire neighborhood, knocked on every door, and I lined up probably 2 or 3 weeks worth of gutter cleaning jobs.
Love it.
And then someone would ask me, "Hey, do you wash windows? Do you power wash?" "Well, sure, yeah, we do." I'd practice on my mom's house, so we knew we weren't
didn't pull all the siding off.
Exactly. So we learned how to do it, and so I've always just kind of had that entrepreneurial mindset. I've realized the most reliable source of income for my family is going to be from a business that I create. And what I love about what we do is I feel like I've created a business that offers such a high level of reward and satisfaction because we're making such a giant impact on people's lives. I mean, you're talking about generational wealth. We're able to make simple adjustments to a person's financial plan that could impact generations. Like, who gets to do that? It's pretty amazing.
It's a fantastic opportunity. I wanted to go back to something you were saying when you were a kid, right? How did it affect you seeing, because you said your dad handled it really well. Your mom...
He pretended to handle it
really well. He pretended to handle... He put on a facade, right? He had a facade of handling it really well.
Ironclad facade,
Right. And your mom, not as much, right? What was it like, what did it feel like? How did it affect you emotionally, like seeing your mom go through that? Like, I want to dive into that more because I think those are the moments that psychologically kind of form the framework for how we're going to process stuff in the future, right? How did that affect you?
I remember I was probably 9 or 10 years old when I saw my mom for the first time have a stress-induced seizure.
Oh, wow.
She was kind of... She had these tremors. She was kind of trembling and shaking for a few days, kind of leading up to this, and we didn't really know what was going on. I just noticed that my mom was acting strange, and she was under a ton of stress. And for her, it was embarrassing. She's asking for help from friends and from family, and everybody wants to be financially independent, and we're we kind of have that sense of feeling ashamed when we're not.
Right.
We shouldn't, but we kind of feel that way.
Right.
So that really was heavy for her. And I remember watching her, and I'd never seen anybody have a seizure, so I didn't even know what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, in my 9 or 10-year-old mind, I thought my mom was dying
Yeah.
because of our financial problems.
Right.
And what would that do to any kid?
Right.
And I thought, and that really kind of burned deep inside me, this desire to never let anybody be in a situation. If I have anything to say about it, don't let anybody in that kind of a situation where they're so overwhelmed with that burden of this financial tragedy.
Right.
So I was just so terrified of that situation. I really had, some kind of PTSD from that.
Yeah.
And I kind of made it my mission to avoid that at
Right.
all costs. So that's where, I think I had 2 jobs, W-2 jobs. I buttered buns at Chick-fil-A, and I think I helped people find a seat at Marie Callender's, and I sold pies.
Yeah.
And from then on, I was self-employed, running my own business, because I was too afraid of anybody having the power to withhold income from my family.
Right.
And that's how I saw my dad's employers.
Yeah.
I was always wondering, I was terrified of
that happening to you.
that happening. Yeah, that happening to me.
No, which is expected. We'll get into it later, but I have a similar situation, but it was with my family, my mom being really sick, and it had kind of the same effect on me, where it became this thing that ingrained almost like a fire and a passion in me to make sure that those situations just didn't happen to anyone in my family ever again. Where do you fall in the siblings? You said you're one of 8, correct?
Yeah, I'm technically second to last. Technically, because I have
okay.
a twin brother who's a minute older.
Okay.
So
Okay.
he's
which I'm sure he would make sure we knew.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
We're always reminded of that, because remember, the oldest got to sit in front.
Yep.
So
exactly.
he was a
always
minute
in
older,
front.
so he tried to claim that principle.
How did this affect your siblings? Like, did they all go on to be successful? Did they all struggle? Where are they?
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a mixed bag.
Okay.
But everybody was absolutely impacted by
Right.
it, just in a different way.
Right.
Some of my siblings have seen incredible success just because they've kind of had that fear driving them.
Right.
That's a very powerful emotion. Others, I think, have just kind of found a way to live life and really have their focus on other things and just create a comfortable life for themselves. And
Yeah.
but it's interesting, though, to see how important education has been for everybody, just to understand money.
Right.
Even if there's not a whole lot of it, but just understand how it works, make sure it's organized. And
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned fear, right? A couple times you mentioned fear and being afraid. You and I have talked about abundance mindset and how we're trying to get our clients to a place where they can have an abundance mindset about stuff instead of a scarcity mindset.
Right.
So now I see you're living in this state of abundance, right? You're living in this mindset of abundance. How did you shed the fear? Like, how do you get over the fear? Because so many people, for whatever reason or experience that they've had, they're grown up, and especially financially, in fear. How do you get away from that? Because it's so hard to do. How did you do it?
it does take a paradigm shift. I think you
Yeah.
have to think differently, and I think the biggest paradigm shift for me was to understand that money comes from good ideas, and money comes from solving problems.
Sure.
It doesn't come from somebody allowing you to have the money, someone giving you the money. You can create the money with good ideas, and what that means is, you're going to be much better off financially if you have good ideas and
Right.
if you have the ability to solve problems. So that's where just education and being informed and filling your mind. That's been a goal of mine, is filling my mind with some of the smartest people who've ever walked the planet. They've basically downloaded their brains into books.
Right.
I mean, these books.
It's their life's work, and you get to.
You could have like a 4-hour conversation with one of the smartest people on the planet
Right.
for $14.
Right.
But it's kind of a one-way conversation, but
Yeah.
you're getting
No, still.
you're getting that download, and so I think that has helped kind of dispel the fear. And being in the know, clarity is huge.
Right.
If you are confused, or if your financial situation is foggy, if you're not sure that your tax strategy is going to work, or if you're not sure that your asset allocation is appropriate, or you don't know about the risk that you're taking, you're really kind of going to be overwhelmed by just that lack of clarity. So having clarity, being informed, having a team. So I can only know so much, but I can get to know people who are much smarter than me in other areas, and the more I can kind of recruit kind of my own A team, I can minimize and even eliminate a lot of those risks.
Yeah, absolutely. So on your kind of educational path, did you go the traditional route? Did you go to college? Did you skip college? How was the education path?
It's kind of funny. So having the context of my upbringing is probably good right now, because you kind of understand how I approach school. So, I had a hard time focusing in high school. That was I just was so interested in being financially comfortable, just so afraid of that whole circumstance that I went through with my family, and I didn't see any solutions to it in high school, and so it was kind of hard for me to really allow my mind to grab hold on things. And I did well, mostly crammed for tests, and I ended up with like pretty close to straight A's. I'm pretty good at cramming,
but not because you were a great student.
No, because I was good at cramming. And then I got into school, to college, and I learned there too that nothing here is going to make me wealthy. Nothing here is going to address the number one concern that I have, financially. And right around that time is when I met my wife, and I met her dad, and I realized I need to be filling my mind with information that's going to help me, over that concern, that financial concern. And so from that point forward, every bit of my education's been, financially focused. And there's a bunch of courses I've done really just to fill my mind with that information.
What impact you've mentioned your father-in-law a couple times, right? What impact have mentors had, and how important is it for people that maybe traditional education isn't the end-all be-all for their growth? What impact does a mentor have on your success?
Oh, huge. One thing my father-in-law would say is, don't let school get in the way of your education. So you need to be meaningful about your education, and be and have intent. Like, know exactly what it is that you're wanting to acquire. What kind of knowledge are you wanting to acquire, and go after it. There's not enough time in a lifetime to read every book in this world, right? So you're going to have to be selective. So what parameters are you going to use to choose the books you read and what you fill your mind with? Well, it should be in alignment with your goals, your ambitions, and maybe your fears, right? So that's really how we've approached our kids' education. My wife and I have 6 kids, and we're doing some at-home private school type courses, but we're trying to give them as much of the steering wheel as possible to be able to explore their interests, because I think you're gonna do the best when you're in an arena you're interested in.
And with so your upbringing obviously was very different than how you're raising your kids and the experience your kids are having. How do you instill the lessons that you've learned along this journey? How do you instill those principles, those lessons into your kids?
Oh, I love this. I'd say the biggest thing, especially if you're an investor, is to include your kid. I include my kids in those conversations. I let them listen to my wife and I talk about, a real estate deal, a vacation rental, or an apartment complex, or a fund that we're looking at. And the older kids will ask questions. We own some real estate, some direct holdings. We'll do vacation rentals, and my kids will ask, the older kids will ask about the numbers. How is it that we can afford all these houses? And so we'll talk about, our gross rents. We'll talk about our mortgage and our interest rate. We got a loan from the bank, and we have to pay the bank this much, and we have utilities. We got to pay them this much, but we're getting this much in rent. And there are times I've seen my sons eyeballs get big and he's realizing, holy crap, this is cool. That's the kind of education I want to make. Yeah,
it's great to see that.
It's exciting.
Yeah,
I love it.
And how do you, one of the most common questions that we get from clients is, they've had this great success. How do you make it so that your kids don't become spoiled, right? Everybody has this image of the trust fund kid where they've got all this access to money and they're seeing this money and they're talking about wealth and they turn into these, spoiled brats basically. How do you keep your kids from becoming that? Involve them and everything, but keep them from becoming those kind of typical trust fund kids?
Yeah, I think kids get spoiled when they get stuff and there's no work on their part.
Right.
There's nothing really they have that they feel like they've earned.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a human nature to want to earn stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You want to deserve stuff. You want to accomplish things, and so and those can be very small things. And I think parents should know their children well enough to know how to tailor that experience
right.
to a child. And you could do it at very young ages, but if you've got, we're on about 8.5 acres. We've got 14 chickens, and we've got
Nice.
a dog, and the kids have things that they do that they've got to work for. But also, if they want to purchase things, we have a system in our home where the kids earn money,
Okay.
and they have to use their own money for certain types of purchases.
Okay.
So if it's like a luxury thing, it's not necessary. It's a certain type of shoe. They've already
Yeah.
got shoes that we've provided for them, but they want this other
Right.
one. Well, you have to buy that one yourself. And what's interesting is they're much more interested in what those things cost because they're using their own money,
Right.
and they have some perspective of what it takes to acquire that money. So it helps them appreciate it
Yeah.
a little better.
Are you able to explain that system a little bit? So, because I'm sure people would be kind of curious about how that works. Maybe something people want to implement in their own homes.
Well, it depends. There was kind of a weekly allowance thing that we did for a while.
Yeah.
And then as we acquired investment properties, there became a lot more opportunities for the kids to do things. And so we were able to identify, which projects are best suited for certain age groups. And so I have my son, for example, he's mowing the lawns for some of the properties. He's doing the yard work, and we'll pay him a certain hourly wage. My daughter will help out with some of the cleaning of the properties. She earns money that way. The little kids, they come and they do their very best, and they get paid. You'll have to decide what you feel like is appropriate for your kids. But
Right.
I think there's nothing better, in my opinion, than for a family to be involved together in an activity that is rewarding the family financially. So they
Right.
get an idea for what it takes to support this family financially, and everybody gets a piece of it, right?
Yeah.
It's like your own little family corporation.
Business. Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
And everybody's kind of a shareholder, and everyone's got skin in the game. And then when they want to spend their money, they kind of have an idea for what it takes to earn that, so they appreciate it. They're a little more careful, actually,
Right.
what they're spending.
Right.
And that's really what you.
Yeah.
I think that's the financial foundation you want to move into adulthood with.
Well, and I think it's really cool too because you're not just focusing on the cash. You're not just focusing on the dollar figure. You're focusing on more so on the principles and how to think about money rather than what you're going to do with the money. And I think that's great that you guys can do that in such an effective way. And hopefully a lot of people will implement that into their own lives. I know we will with our kids. Our daughters are only 4 and 2, so it's a little hard to enforce at this point.
Yeah,
but
they're not too young. They're not too young.
Not too young, but we have little treats or gifts or whatever that they can earn if they do certain chores and things like that.
That's great. I mean, it doesn't have to be money. It could be privileges.
Right.
And one thing I'm glad that we've done is we've tried to help our kids understand that we're investing and we're doing this and we're putting all this work into all these different projects, not to acquire money, but to acquire freedom.
Yeah. It's a huge
and to be
distinction.
freed from the emotional burden of fearing about
Right.
money.
And have there been any conversations in your family of what do you do with all that freedom? What's your impact? What's your purpose? What do you go do with all this newfound liberty?
Yeah. Well, we kind of put that into practice.
Yeah.
So we'll set goals as a family. There's certain things we want to experience together as a family. We've gotten the kids together and kind of have sponsored families during the holidays. We've sponsored. There's a great association. I wish I could remember the name of it in Austin, where you're able to sponsor an orphan kid who doesn't have parents, and you're able to kind of get to know them a little bit.
That's cool.
But I think doing things like that, where the kids can again be involved in the whole process, so they don't only understand what it takes to serve another person and make their life better, but they also get to share in the satisfaction of seeing that family come to their doorstep with whatever it is you left there for them, and that stuff is a whole lot more memorable than anything they've ever gotten as a gift.
Yeah, it's interesting when we set up family foundations or a donor advised fund or anything like that. I always encourage people to involve their kids as much as possible, because those experiences are the ones that kind of ring in the principles. They bring them into the family dynamic and keep them going for a long time, because it associates all the emotion along with the effort, and it just instills those principles permanently. And I love to see that, and it's great to see it at work in your family. That's
I heard
really cool.
I think it was David Nealman. He's the founder of JetBlue.
Yeah.
I think he has every one of his kids as board members on their foundation,
on their investment council.
So
for the foundation.
so their job is to figure out how to give his money away.
Right. Yeah. Mixed feelings on that, maybe. But yeah. Right.
Probably, I'm sure a portion of it.
Yeah. A portion.
I'm sure they're okay.
Yeah. So let's shift back to some of the business stuff. When you went independent, right? Have there been any big hurdles or mistakes that you made along the way where it was like, oh man, that was cutting it close, or anything like that?
Well, mistakes and hurdles, I'd say there are a lot of financial companies that are very interested in getting their products sold. And they put a lot of money and a lot of effort in getting their product or their package in, front and center for financial advisors.
Right.
They want to get those pushed.
Right.
I think it's, and I learned this early on, that you've got to understand that the needs and the financial plan precedes any products.
Right.
Right. Because right out of the gate, I saw these really cool financial products. It does this, and it promises this, and everybody should have it. Right. I'm going to save the world, one product at a time. Right.
Yeah.
I realized this was not the best thing really for anybody. So I learned that quickly, and now everything we do is planning based.
Right.
We want the objectives to come first, like the house metaphor. You got to have the house plans before you go shopping for materials.
Right.
But that in I understood this, but the principle became real for me when I understood the value of bringing together experts in their own field.
Yeah.
I didn't have to be the one to have all the answers.
Right.
And so leveraging some of the brightest minds in this space has been a huge advantage. And that's something I wish I would have learned, the first day.
Yeah.
That would have been my one thing that I would have done, was build that team.
Yeah.
But I kind of did it on my own for a while.
Yeah. If you had to say, the biggest lesson you've learned being an entrepreneur, or the biggest lesson you've learned being in business that you would want to impart on others that are maybe earlier on in the journey, what would that one thing be that you would tell people to focus on?
You are the greatest investment you can make. You should be investing in yourself more diligently than anything else. There's really your wealth, your opportunities are limitless if you're filling your mind with information, and you're again bringing together a team of people that are doing the same thing.
Right.
So I'd say that's probably the most important thing. Whatever your field is, just make sure you're at the top of your game in that field, and you're up to date on all the information that's going to help you do the very best job. Yeah. Because it's good ideas that brings the money.
Right.
Money doesn't bring good ideas.
Right.
Good ideas bring the money.
Right. And knowledge is what bridges that gap that we were talking about earlier, right? And if you can just upgrade your knowledge, you'll eventually find something that you can take action on. To that note, when people go out and they get all this knowledge, there's a lot of people that they have this tendency to kind of sit on it, right?
I was just gonna say, the second thing that came to my mind.
Yeah.
I was like,
Why don't you go into that?
fill your mind with information. The second is learn how to sell,
Yeah.
and not because you're going to go, peddling products to everybody,
Right.
but there are some incredible communication skills you develop when you learn how to sell. Because selling is communication. It's just effective communication. So I have this knowledge and information that will solve a problem you have. Selling is my ability to communicate it clearly enough to you to where you adopt the idea, right? We're selling all the time, right? But there are, getting a good sales job or even waiting tables. I waited tables in college. That was one of the best jobs I ever had to help me understand how to sell and how to communicate with people. So filling your mind with information, but then honing your skill in distributing that information to other people so you can actually make a difference.
It's not enough to just know, you got to be able to do as well.
Yeah, actually have an impact.
Right, do something. So do you remember when you crossed like making $1 million mark? Do you remember when that was?
Oh yeah, I took a picture.
Did you?
Of my bank account. I took a picture of my 1099s, and it was a big day.
What was that like, getting to that point? Like, did you feel like you could rest a little bit, or did it just fire you up and want to make you keep going?
It fired me up, and when you get to that level, when you start operating in those numbers, you also have a very clear perspective of how quickly it can go the other direction. Right. $1 million today isn't what it was, even 3 years ago. Right, with just the inflation we've gone through, and but no, I think it helped me. It gave me a boost, I would say, in the same direction I was pointed in. And your second million comes exponentially easier. And your third and fourth, it compounds. So that I thought, maybe when I got started in my career, I thought that I would feel a whole lot more relieved and satisfied when I got to that number. Fulfilled, yeah, but no.
just more
hungry, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when you get there, you realize like, oh, this isn't that far. Like I thought this point would represent much more progress in life, and I still have so much more to do, so much more to get after, so much more to build. And it's the same thing for me. When we sold our first company and we got paid, it was like, okay, what now?
Yeah,
and then you got to start looking for that next thing.
Well, you feel a little more safe and secure with it, but then it's like, well, how safe do I want to feel? How free do I want to be? Right. If you're going to put a limit on it, and that kind of gets your wheels turning. Right.
And you hear people all the time say, well, the first 10,000 is the hardest and the second is easier, and the first 100,000 is the hardest and the second is easier, and the first million is the hardest and the second is easier. Why do you think that is? Is it just compounding interest, or does it have more, is it something to do with our mentality, or what do you feel that is?
Yeah, I think it's what happens to you in the process of acquiring that wealth. You change. You're not the same person.
Right.
There's also some confidence that comes with it too. I think that helps. Going back to that principle of selling and being able to communicate an idea effectively to somebody. The more confident you are, the more clear that message is going to be, because the recipient is going to be more willing to accept it because of your level of confidence, right? So everybody
kind of feeds
benefits.
Itself. Yeah. No, that's pretty cool. So running a business includes, managing people and, staying creative and learning and doing and all these things. How do you keep it all straight? Because to somebody starting out, you show everything that you do day to day. You show your schedule, and it seems chaotic. It seems like it's too much. So how do you manage that time? How do you keep it straight?
Is people. I think it's having the right people. There are certain things that are going to be easier for you to kind of have a handle on. There's some things that might be really difficult, depending on how your mind works and where your interests are. Some aspects of your business are just going to be harder for you to manage than it would be for another person with a different kind of mindset. So I think the most successful businesses that I've seen are those that have the right people in the right places. And you kind of need to know where your lane is too as a business owner. Like, what are you really good at? What can you do that nobody else can? Right? And then what are you doing that anybody else can? So kind of identify those two lanes and just offload all that stuff somebody else can do. Find really good people to do that so you can stay in your lane. And that's going to be not only good for your business, it's going to be good for your emotional health.
Yeah, and in that, kind of thread, you're focusing so much on business, you're kind of just going at it all the time, getting after growing your business and adding revenue and taking care of customers and all that chaos. What do you do to keep yourself mentally healthy? Like, what do you do to keep yourself grounded and not losing your mind in all this noise?
I just read an interesting book. It talked about this. I think it was called How the Rich Think. And most people kind of work and they plan vacations and other activities like in between work. It said the wealthy, ultra wealthy, do the inverse. They work in between their vacations and their activities. So your business is only going to be as good as the sharpness of your mind. And if you're not taking some time to kind of sharpen the saw and feed yourself, you're gonna be worthless in your business. So we plan activities and trips at the very start of the year. My family does. We decide where we want to go. Now this past year was really kind of exciting because we instead of giving our kids stuff for Christmas last year, we gave them all a one-on-one trip with mom and dad.
Oh, that's cool.
And we kind of tailored each of their trips to kind of their interests. And so they're really very diverse trips, but we kind of planned all of those out. We said, well, this is what we're doing this year, and it hasn't, business hasn't suffered because of it. In fact, you can probably say it's been better than ever, just because I feel better than ever. We're having a really good time. So you can get burned out real easy.
Definitely.
And I think anybody who owns a business knows that. So you've got to be really careful to make sure you're taking that kind of time, and you have habits daily to take care of yourself. I try to go to the gym at least 5 days a week. That's just as good for my mental health as it is my physical health.
Absolutely.
Have date nights with your spouse. My wife and I go out once or twice a week. So all those things kind of keep me fresh for the business.
Oh, that's great. And what do you do for fun? How do you, when you want to just let loose, what do you do?
It could be just, laying on the floor and having all the kids pile on me, and that's just what we do. We have a lazy night, watch a movie, or, we'll take our RV up to Colorado and do some hiking. I really enjoy fishing. We just went out fishing out in San Diego on a buddy's boat and caught like 35 mahi-mahi. And
that's awesome.
I love being outdoors. And if we can't travel somewhere, we'll do something outside, at the lake or something.
That's awesome. We're coming to a close here and running out of time. Producers are telling me to wrap it up, but my last thing I really wanted to get out of you is, if you had to leave just a couple key pieces of information behind that, you're not going to be here tomorrow, you're gone, and you want the world to know that you knew XYZ, and you want your kids to know this, what would those things be that you want to impart on the world and on your family?
I'd say your impact on your family and on your community and on the world can be as big as you believe you can make it. Awesome. I think really believing in yourself, and don't wait for somebody to make your life great. You've got to do it.
I love it. Well, thanks for coming on as a guest this time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this podcast with Nathan Fort, where we talked about everything from business to work-life balance to getting out of your own head, overcoming fears, running a business. Join us next time. I'm going to interview Marco Champion, talking about entrepreneurship, marketing, and everything else in between. We'll see you soon.